panel, academic session. I'm very glad that I can moderate it actually. 3 very nice papers surrounding the topic of surveillance, of course, and privacy. We have 2 more theoretical papers proposing changes to currently existing theories, such as privacy by design, and a paper combining 2 theories. Both papers propose new approaches to established concepts. Elisa proposes a new model, the minimum harm by design model, and Timothy advances a new theory which is called connective surveillance. And the first paper, which will be presented today, follows a rather practical approach and presents a project in the framework of monitoring of employees and how the privacy concerns are tackled in that project. And it's presented by Shin, and we were, sorry to pronounce your name.
Yeah,
Shin. And she will present first, and then we have the 2 more theoretical approaches. I think we will do it like that. We have 1 presentation questions, and in the end, a round of summarizing questions, if you like, and of course, just ask the authors afterwards, after the presentations. And please contribute, because it's rather an academic session, like a seminar at a university, I was told. So just come forward and ask questions. So yes, please start, and then you could.
I have first question. How do I get this there?
Yeah, this is for the guy who I just asked to do it. Who left? Can you please do it?
So maybe mine was working actually.
Maybe it was, huh? Yes.
Great.
Ja, we staan klaar. Is goed.
Perfect.
Okay. Good. Good afternoon. I will shortly summarize the findings of the paper I wrote with Jonathan Guislain, Jean-Marc Seigneur and Xavier Titi from the University of Genève. I will cover 3 topics in this talk. The first one is about what is Muses, what the RT2AE is, and why we developed Muses. The second topic is about why we had such a big focus on privacy by design, and what the role is of software developers. And then the third topic is about what the things that we really did. So, which privacy by design measures did we take? So Muses. Before I will say what Muses really is and what the RT2AE really is, I will say why we had something like Muses. And in short, it was to increase company security. The different technological developments have changed the nature of company security strategies. I mean, they have changed the breadth, so also the strategies behind preventing that. And we still see that employees remain the main cause of security incidents. So employers might have, they might want to monitor their employees, but this is limited by privacy and data protection law. In this whole story, there are many difficulties. So the whole thing about company security, there are many difficulties, but today we will focus on what developers can do to make security systems more privacy friendly. And so the method is just like a case study, so the Muses RT2AE component. And then, so what is Muses? It's a user-centric company security system that we developed in an FP7 project. Muses stands for Multi-Platform Usable Endpoint Security, and it aims to enhance company security by reducing security risks introduced by user behavior. And the user here is a bit confusing. The user here is the employee, but actually the end users of Muses are companies. It's confusing, but it's, yeah. The RT2AE is one component of the Muses system, and it stands for Real-Time Risk and Trust Analysis Engine. And what it does is that it assesses actually like context data and in order to allow or deny access to a company document, and this is based on the trust value of the user. Okay, so what happens in Muses? It's the data are several context data are collected by the sensors, and then this goes to the event processor. The event processor then checks like what is requested, which document is requested, what are the rules to get access, and then the RT2AE decides whether access can be granted, and then the KRS stands for Knowledge Refinement System. That does things on the long run, but you can forget it. And then in the end, the data are erased if everything goes well. But in order to determine whether someone can get access, there is like a lot of information going through Muses, and so this can be privacy intrusive. And this brings me to my second topic. And this is about the role of the Muses developers in this story. Like, what did they do? What can they do to increase privacy friendliness? Well, the thing is that from a legal perspective, developers don't have a responsibility really. They are not really obliged to make this effort. So, because the responsibility lays with the data controller. And the data controller, I think everybody knows that is the natural or legal person who determines the purposes and means of the processing. Everybody also probably knows Article 23 of the proposed GDPR, where privacy by design is mentioned, but then still it's not an obligation for developers. It's only for data controllers. And then also because the whole GDPR is only applicable when there is processing of personal data, which is not happening when you're developing something. However, there can be a potential business advantage, because if it becomes an obligation, then people who buy this system, companies, they will want it to be privacy friendly. And then in Muses, actually the main reason why we started with this whole privacy by design thing was because the tagline of Muses was security with the user at heart. So if you talk about the user as in the employee, with them at heart, then you need to consider their privacy, of course. So then what did we do? So how did all these considerations of privacy and data protection, how did they influence the final setup of Muses and how Muses functions? Okay, like it was a procedure. I mean, it was mainly influenced by a procedure. And the first step was communication between all actors. So we had really long discussions. That took us most of the time, I think. Really long discussions between the end users, so the companies who would buy Muses, who would use Muses, the technical partners, and then the legal partners, so us, Leuven. And this was to understand each other's language and like what each other's needs were, like what we wanted. And then we found that we had one thing in common that we were always talking about, but it meant something completely different, but that was policies. So everybody was always talking about policies and rules. So the companies, they had their security policies that they wanted to see enforced, but the technical people, they wanted to include policies in the system to make the system smart. And then from a legal perspective, there are many policies, kind of policies. And so this was something that always came back, and I will also come back to this later. The second step was to define key guidelines, and then for the technical and other partners to understand these guidelines. And then the third step was the implementation. So this was in the end done. And then that was based on the life cycle of the data. And then I will show the examples that are linked to the different components in Muses. Okay, very short. So what were the basics that we used to define the key guidelines? So for privacy, we used mainly Article 8. So is this applicable in the workplace? Yes, of course. Helford, Nimitz, there are many examples. Now recently the Barbulescu case. And then the question is like, is there an interference, then would the reasonable expectations of privacy come up, and then is there when there isn't interference, then it can be justified, but I think everybody knows it. And then the protection of personal data. Something that is interesting here is the employee consent, because of course you need a legal ground for the processing of personal data. And in the employment situation, this is a bit difficult because you have a subordinate relationship where the employee is works for someone else, and there is this hierarchy. And it's mainly accepted that then that employees can give their consent for the processing of personal data, although this is not written in stone because there are examples where it is possible, but in general, and definitely when it's so intrusive, this is not accepted. Another thing is for purpose limitation, that it's the employment relationship is a very close relationship, so if the data are reused for another purpose, it can have really drastic consequences, and it's not like it's even when your personal data are misused by big internet companies, the direct impact on your life might be less big, but when there is a security camera in the company and it's explicitly said that this is only for security reasons, but if you are visible doing something else in your work, you can get fired based on this evidence, while actually it's a security camera, and the fact that you're not performing well or not performing at all is not really a security matter. So it has more drastic consequences. That's it. So then we put everything together and then looked like what is important for the development of this security system. And then we came to 4 guidelines based on the principles. So for purpose limitation, so purpose limitation, it was mainly like that we obliged the developers to think about what their components did and like should do and why. So based on the policies. And this is something like in data protection law, it's not really their responsibility, but if they start thinking about it, it will be easier for companies later to comply with law. It's really logical. And then the second thing is data minimization. I have here some things like anonymization and pseudonymization, but the basic thing that we told them is that you can't do more than what is really necessary, and in the end, after a few years, they really understood that. And then data security, because that's also it's so logical and it's so basic, but it's important, and it's something that people understand, that technical people understand. So in Muses we have many security aspects like encryption things. And then the 4th thing was user empowerment. But under that category we put everything like the transparency and the information that the data subjects should get. We put everything under there. So how did it help? So what was the result of this? I just show quickly this again so that you see like collection, analysis, storage, and erasure. And then some examples from the RT2, based on the RT2AE. So for the collection of the data, I already said it, we first looked into the company policies. So we made standard company policies, security policies, and then we checked like what were the main points, what were the main things that companies want to achieve. And an example is that they want that employees only access documents from safe areas. So when they are at home or when they are in the company, but definitely not from the airport or from the McDonald's. And so therefore we defined certain safe zones, and this was linked to the Wi-Fi connection of the device. So this would influence the trust value, which is used by the RT2AE to determine whether or not you can get access. Then the storage of the data. The information that was stored was limited to the trust value of the users. So it was before we also want, okay, not we, they also wanted to store all the context information that was gathered by the sensors. But because that would be too intrusive, it was only necessary actually to keep the last trust value of the user. And then data erasure, this one was a good one because we built in a privacy shield. The shield, the word is wrong, I know, but that was a word that they came up with. But what it does is automatically erase information after it's no longer necessary. So, and then we have hard limits for this and soft limits. So hard limits, that is like even when the information is still necessary, sometimes the information will be erased because of national provisions. So sometimes it will be, there will be a rule, like national rule that says that you can only keep information until 3 months after an employee leaves, or things like that. So that are hard limits. And then the soft limits, it's not that it doesn't have to be erased then, but it's because it's more flexible and more fluent. And this could be when there is a new trust value. So then it's only the last trust value that will be stored and not the previous ones. And then data analysis, this is really linked to data collection. But in the beginning, we were also thinking of using e-reputation as one element for the trust value, because the trust value, it says how trustworthy a person is at this moment and whether it's enough to get access to the document. But in order to get a real trust value that really specifies one person, you could use e-reputation and like all the information that you can find online, but we chose to only use information that is workplace related or has a direct influence on the work environment. So not your Facebook profile information. So we started from company policies and then we tried to get from there what was important. And then when we were trying to find technical ways to enforce these policies, privacy was immediately there as a goal of the system. So we had a goal-based development process, but privacy was an integral part of the whole development. And we tried to have the user at heart. It didn't work always, but it's a long way to go. And that's also why the title of the paper was On the Road to, because we're not there yet.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Maybe can you give a concrete example for what kind of factors are actually measured? I mean, in which situation do you need the Muses system?
So Muses will be used always when you try to access something of the company. So all documents that are on your company database when you want to work, it would always be used. And then it checks, for example, your Wi-Fi connection, and it checks like how valuable this document is, how much time you have to work on it, because if it's an expensive document and you only have 5 minutes and you are not a CEO, then probably the access would be denied.
Okay. Thanks. Do you have any questions regarding this presentation of the project?
I'm a research assistant at the University of Münster. Actually, Franziska Boehm's research assistant. And my question is, if you are only providing the legal framework for the test design, or if you have partners in the project who actually realize the software. Because I'm particularly interested because we are in Germany working on a similar project. I don't know if you've heard about it, but we're also focusing on the employee as a risk factor in a company, and we're trying to measure and improve IT security awareness by sending phishing emails to the employee.
Well, The Muses is finished actually since September, but the new project I'm working in is exactly what you're saying. So maybe we can discuss that after. But no, in Muses, what we this was an answer to the whole bring your own device issues. Like, because companies, they didn't know what to do. Okay, you have like the fiscal discussions, but then the tax discussions, but then what to do with privacy, and it came from there. So it's not at all about phishing. It's really when I use my device or a company device or any device, how can company data be protected? And then a company could choose for a system like Muses, and then all the things come in. But this is actually a prototype. So we had technical partners developing everything. Yeah.
Okay, so it's going to be implemented in a company.
Yes, so that is now going on like with a new, but then now in Horizon, 3 partners are going to make it market ready. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I was wondering, because I saw that it was based on the directive, and I was wondering whether you see any changes because of the upcoming regulation, for example, in the area of erasure and some rights to be forgotten.
No, for the right to be forgotten, no, but we included, it's the project ended in September, so during the project we already considered the regulation, and also we did a bit more than what is expected, because I say like it's really, we put a lot of responsibility on the developers. Okay, not legal responsibility, but they had to consider more than usually. And also we had some German partners, so we used Belgian and German law as the standard, so not Italian or Spanish.
Okay, thanks. Any other question before we continue? Because we still have 2 presentations left, so maybe we continue with Timothy, if you're ready.
I believe so.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Cool, I guess we'll do this thing down. So my talk is called The Logic of Connective Surveillance, Distributed Social Movements, and the Role of Centralized Communication Infrastructures. So about me real quick. My name's Tim Libert. I'm a grad school at the Penn Annenberg School. In a former life, I was a web developer. My primary research interest is in web tracking, so I kind of went from making websites to seeing a lot more tracking elements on the sites to want to go to school and figure out what that meant. So the contexts I've been working in are health privacy. I've looked at health websites and tracking, Chinese websites. I've been looking at journalism, what I call web scale, self-regulatory failure. Today's talk is kind of outside of this context I usually work in, so I'm definitely looking for feedback afterwards as I'm kind of getting to new stuff. So the outline for today's talk is really what this is more is kind of trying to combine 2 different theories. One's a social movements theory and one is a kind of privacy surveillance theory. So the first one is connective action I'll talk about, then I'll talk about surveillance assemblage. The logic of connective surveillance is how those 2 things combine, so that's the second part. And the third part is I apply this to the case of Black Lives Matter protests in the United States, which are about police violence. So moving on. So logic of connective action, this is Lance Bennett and Alexandra Segerberg. And basically what they're talking about in the paper, which has been fairly well read, it's a pretty good paper, they're kind of saying that traditional social movements had structures, and those structures tend to be hierarchical structures where you have leaders, lieutenants, and it breaks down. And what they kind of say is that within social media and with the newer movements, especially I think they're looking at Los Indignados, Spanish, Occupy Wall Street, whatever, and then Occupy Wall Street, and they looked at different ones of these. And they didn't have the same characteristics as other social movements, and they thought the organizing structure of these social movements was less individual leaders and more that the movements kind of self-organized around what they call personal action frames, but are more widely known as hashtags or memes. And as they say here, in place of, kind of distributed in relationships that are brokered by hierarchical organizations, is based on sharing personal expression. So the important thing here is brokered, and they're saying brokers are gone. Also called intermediaries. And I would say they're not gone, they still exist. And so another one, which also uses the phrase late modernity, is Haggerty and Erickson, which is surveillance assemblage. And they say they view surveillance as one of the main institutional components of late modernity, which I think anybody at this conference would disagree with. And so what they're basically saying, which I like, all due respect to George Orwell next door, they're basically saying the idea of Big Brother, that you have this like centralized, all-seeing eye that everybody has to be afraid of, doesn't really apply to the actual lived surveillance that we have today, which is multiple overlapping systems. There's not like a central, ministry of surveillance. Instead, we have a bunch of market competition, which provides that amply well. And again, they say emphasis on the state is too restrictive, and that there's massive efforts to monitor populations which do not originate in the state. So I was looking at these two ideas, and there's the similarities. They both say they're from late modernity, which is another way of saying they think these are new things. They highlight the fact that both have flattened structures. So in one, it's the flattened structure of the social movement, and the other one is the flattened structure of the surveillance. And both of these reference information services that are free to use. So the Bennett and Zuckerberg Connective Action, they're talking about the fact that you have organizing agents of social media, etc. And then likewise, the second half of that sentence is in surveillance assemblage, where they talk about people exchange data for services. But when you kind of look at these, one of them is that we have this like awesome time for social movements that can organize themselves and can just appear in a minute, and the other one is, oh my God, we live in this horrible surveillance state. And that paper, I think they say trying to stop surveillance is like sweeping back the ocean with a broom. So we're going to have two extreme views to try to harmonize. Talk about logic of connected surveillance. So first I'll talk about like what's an idea of traditional surveillance. So collective action, according to Bennett and Zuckerberg, is traditionally relationships that are brokered by hierarchical organizations. So you can see here, like, all right, we have, maybe this is the leader, and this is people who report to her, and this is the rest of the people. So if you want to know what's going on in that network, you would surveil 3 people, and you would get everybody on the page, and those people would be fairly static. And as an aside, this is a general idea of targeted surveillance. It's kind of like in the popular imagination. When you think of surveillance, you think of like, that's the guy. So, you know, you have Martin Luther King. You want to know about the civil rights movement, spend your resources on Martin Luther King Jr. I'd like to have a quick aside and point out the title does say Logic of Surveillance. One of the people who had an FBI record is Lucille Ball, and I don't know if everybody knows, she had one of the most kind of like funny but non-political and pointless comedies ever on television. And she had a FBI file because apparently she was a communist, and they believed in the 1950s she was simultaneously entertaining America and undermining the state for the Soviets or something. So even though the talk says logic of surveillance, there's always some absurdity when you get into detail. So anyways, this is more of a network that Bennett or Zuckerberg is going to tell us exists. These are networks that, based on the subject, you're going to reconfigure. People are going to go in and out of play. And so if we want to surveil these, where do we put our resources? So in the last one we had, say, 3 people to monitor, and now how do we choose which 3, especially because things change quite rapidly. More importantly, which are like the main notes. You see in this one, okay, well this person's really good, and this other one, they kind of fall off the map. So, it's hard to keep telling my head, but anyways, connected surveillance. So the key point here that brings these two together is Bennett and Zuckerberg say these are changing populations. So essentially you're targeting doesn't work as the population changes radically. And the second, these populations are linked by non-state institutions, which are, again, massive efforts to monitor. So the connected surveillance model is to exploit existing surveillance infrastructures to monitor these dynamic movements. So here's our non-hierarchical model, but there's a centralized routing, right? So if you think about not just the internet having a routing infrastructure, but commercial products having a routing infrastructure, you can see that if any person on the node is actually connecting to another person, they're passing through a data center that's owned by somebody. These could be any of our sponsors. So here we go. So again, in this case, if you wanted to get everybody in the network and you only had 4 to choose, you just choose those 4. And so what you have is, even though you have this mirroring of everything's gotten flat, you have leaderless movements, you have leaderless surveillance, they kind of work in tandem, and I think they result from the same set of late modern things. Likewise, there's details on, say, the NSA's relationship to these countries or companies are fairly sketchy. The motivations, I think, are fairly clear, even if the details are unknown. So a quick summary of this part, these non-hierarchical movements require a flattened surveillance as well. As commercial surveillance is in place to do both. Again, both these are late modern. Another thing that I think is important here is a lot of times people talk about surveillance and mass surveillance, talk about we have to find the needle in the haystack. I think that's actually kind of a misleading bullshit claim. The haystack is what they want because a haystack has structure, and what they're looking for is structure, especially in social movement surveillance. So the question, can we observe this empirically? So first, I think there's kind of like surveillance tautologies, which is if you're a Facebook user, you're surveilled by Facebook, which is true, but doesn't, to me, really get into the heart of things. Likewise for Twitter. So what I have in mind is really trying to follow the idea of the surveillance assemblage and see how are these surveillance structures really overlapping in places we don't expect them. So we're going to go beyond walled gardens, and what I want to look at here is the web. So instead of like having this narrow focus on one platform, if we have this ocean of surveillance has been theorized, we're going to find it on the web. Likewise, if we're going to the connective action, essentially this is the memes, right? That the hashtag Black Lives Matter is going to be the meme. The organization is going to accrue around that. So we can follow that meme moving across the web, and we can see what types of surveillance are accruing around this piece of text. So here we go. And again, there's this overlap. We're talking primarily about, the online world, but the online world and the real world are one. I don't think there's a distinction, and I think this picture shows it quite well. All right, so what I did is I started with a few of these personal action frames. These are related to police violence protests, which I'm not going to get into because it's too depressing at the moment. Black Lives Matter, if they gun me down, criming while white, hands up, don't shoot, and I can't breathe. So again, the surveillance here is that these frames exist, and within the surveillance context, we can discover it. So what I did, first I found all the pages that had search results related to these hashtags. I scanned those with a software platform I wrote called WebX-Ray, which I've been using for other studies. Basically what that software does is it loads a page, it analyzes the network level requests that are being made, and then it subsequently connects those to the companies that own the servers. We can talk about that later if you want. And then what I do is once I figure out what companies are involved, I try to see do they have links from Snowden documents to the NSA in this case. So I used the Bing search API, and I ended up with about 6,000 pages for the population. Here's one of the pages, just as an example of the type of data I was getting. So we have Eternal Summer of the Black Feminist Mind, which is a pretty cool name for a website. So here's this one, and here's her thing. I think what she would probably be surprised to find is when I analyzed her site, it ends up with a lot of requests. So that site, when you load that, your computer gets connected to Google APIs, which if you use Ghostery or something like this, never gets blocked. It's kind of Google's like super secret tracker, which I hate. Gravatar, PayPal, Skim Resources, Twitter, Vimeo, WordPress.com. Skim Resources is interesting because when you actually go to skimresources.com, you get a page that says, if you spotted this somewhere, you may be wondering what it's all about. So that's what the software does. It picks up this stuff which is not expected to be found. So multiply that by 6,000, and this is kind of my picture of how activists react when I tell them this is what's going on. These are the stages of surveillance grief. Here we go. So the aggregate results. So once I looked at these 6,000 pages, 95% had some sort of request to one of these third parties. 88% said a cookie of some sort. Each page on average contacted 21 distinct external entities. So again, this idea of an assemblage around you, 21 connected domains is definitely an assemblage. But this is dominated by a handful of companies, many of them with a tie to the NSA. So going back to PRISM, again, we don't know exactly what PRISM is. We know it's at best or at worst an expression of interest. And this is the results. When I looked at these pages, Google can track about 92% of the pages, which is a lot. Facebook at 56, Yahoo 39, and we get AOL, which amazingly still exists, at 20%, and Microsoft at 7, who obviously need to be doing more work. And so the state surveillance of the top 5 companies are getting a massive amount of data, and I imagine unknowing to most participants in this movement. 2 of the top 5 are known to have been tapped and maybe forced to work with the NSA. And 5 of the 7 PRISM companies exist. And when you look at that, over 90% of pages link data in some way to the NSA. I'm not saying the NSA is spying on Black Lives Matter. I'm saying the infrastructure exists should they ever choose to, or if there's a similar movement that maybe is more hostile to the United States, they would do that as well. So real quick, I looked at a few of these personal action frames around the web. Found there's widespread surveillance by a range of these corporations, and these corporations can be leveraged by the government for surveillance. Real quick, future advocacy. The big problem here is that activists use very centralized communication networks because they're easy and they're free. Decentralizing stuff can make a huge difference. So one of the things I really think activists really need to do is stop using WordPress and start using more small-scale mom-and-pop hosting or hosting in other countries like Iceland. One way to kind of do this is to reach out with social movements with best practice guidelines, which is something I was involved with advocating with Occupy Wall Street many years ago, which had some benefits. And the other thing to do is I think this is a thing that can be, kind of recognized in the press as well to really get much more awareness that issues related to whatever the movement is for is important, but issues related to how that message is transmitted over the network is also equally important. So conclusion, there's a few theories that can give us some insights how social movements and surveillance work. Likewise, Snowden has given us this trove of documents. I think it's the job of researchers to try to combine these things and figure out what we can from them. And it is exceedingly difficult for protest movements to really interact or exist within the way Bennett and Söderberg describe. But education here is key, which is not surprising for an academic to say. And also the movements of tomorrow are being surveilled today. So this is an ongoing surveillance platform, all of them. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for making my research possible. I could not have done this without Google, Facebook, or Microsoft. Again, if you want to contact me, it's my email address, my website, and you can get the software at GitHub or webxray.org. Cool.
Okay, thanks a lot for this very interesting and very comprehensive presentations. I think there are questions because it's quite interesting, so please come forward and ask because it was a lot to digest, I think. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned that in terms of advice for advocacy groups that they might want to move to the service in Iceland or other solutions like that, basically moving away from the major platform. Now, a few years ago, the advice that many of these groups got was move to the central platform because you cannot sustain yourself and protect yourself against, for example, DDoS attacks when you're located with some sort of self-hosted or smaller organization. So, for organizations who are fearing these sort of circumstances of surveillance and want to protect themselves, yet at the same time not be vulnerable to be hacked, taken down, DDoS attacks and whatnot, how can they match these sort of elements?
I think one of the things that's interesting if you look at kind of the history of online activism is the big thing that people were talking about, writing papers about in the late 90s and early 2000s was indie media. And so indie media was, I forget their exact motto, but it was something like own the media or something like this, which is a recurrent thing in alternative media. People always want to like own the media. And they had like a pretty successful model, but ultimately had a lot of, my understanding is a ton of personal politics infighting, and it fell apart partially because they went grants or something. And if you look at kind of like the discourse from the 90s too, of like what will the web mean for democracy and stuff, it's like, you know, there's going to be a million flowers blooming and all this, and you did kind of see that with indie media. And then it kind of collapsed because it became really cheap. So on one hand, I do think you can maybe trust some of the companies to a certain degree to keep data private and accessible, as long as private doesn't include the company. And for most of these companies too, it is keeping data private is largely because data is revenue, right? So if you keep a certain revenue stream exclusive to your company and excluded to another company, you have an advantage over them. So if you really look at like Google and Facebook, they don't share a lot of data with each other. Oddly, Twitter uses Google Analytics, which is strange that they would be flowing outwards. So the short answer is I kind of wish we had the indie media model that collapsed. The longer answer is you can trust the companies to protect their own interests. And the rare occasions those go with user interests, I think fine, but not always.
Okay, one more, and then we go to Elisa, because otherwise she doesn't have a chance to present. Okay, short.
Yeah, so privacy perceptions for people are very much dependent on context, so that's what we generally accept right now. So if I think about this kind of activism, if people use, for example, encrypted services, I'm sure they have lots of faith in their privacy and that they don't want to end up in the database of the NSA. But if you use Twitter, aren't you maybe already assuming that it's going to end up there anyway? And would then it be a problem for the people because they kind of already embrace that fact?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's kind of two answers to that. So the first one is based on kind of this study, what I was doing. It was more placing the meme in place of the individual as a unit of analysis. So the idea that if a social movement can accrue around an idea, then you follow the idea. And likewise, it's a different type of surveillance where maybe you're not surveilling those individual leaders, you're trying to figure out what's the structure of the haystack. And in response to the second one, the issue with web tracking that is distinct from stuff like Twitter, like you knowingly are using Twitter. If you visit a web page that has a share button embedded, most people aren't aware, and it's not clear from what you visually see that that data also goes to Twitter. You may elect to like a Facebook page for your protest movement and know, like, you know, Mark Zuckerberg knows what I like. But if you go out on the web and you get search results based on a topic of interest and you look at a page, you don't understand, or I don't think hardly anybody understands, that that's also a context when that little like button is sending your data back to our sponsor. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. We have one presentation left, so sorry to interrupt that, but I really like to give Elisa a chance to present. Can you just switch? So, Elisa Orru is from the University of Freiburg, and she presents her paper on a new approach to privacy by design, if it's working. So
yeah,
can you just briefly
come? No, it works.
Great.
Okay. Now, yeah, maybe if you come. Perfect. Thank you. Yes. So I'm going to talk about privacy by design and a critical discussion of privacy by design applied to surveillance. I suppose most of you know what's privacy by design, so I'm not going into details about that. But generally, or the basic idea of privacy by design is to implement privacy protection since the earliest stages of technology development. Privacy by design itself is just a set of 7 principles. It has been applied in many different contexts and by many different people too. Like many proposals come from Ankavukian, who was the person who introduced it in Canada, but it has been also applied by a wider the wider engineer and researcher communities. And today I think we can agree that privacy by design is a sort of label. There are many applications of it. Some of them are really effective to protect privacy. Some others are maybe more a tool to improve consumers' trust into organization and enhance business. But I think we can agree that the most consistent application of privacy by design can help protect privacy somehow. I think, but that there is an exception to that, which is surveillance. There has been an increasing trend towards applying privacy by design to surveillance technologies, especially in the European Union in recent years. We have here a couple of documents. So the first one is not specific about surveillance. It is the proposal of General Data Protection Regulation, which will be updated soon, which commits to privacy by design as a standard application for technology developments in Europe. And then the other 2 documents, the standardization mandate and the European Agenda on Security from 2015, they directly address security technologies and say we need privacy by design for security technologies, and mention, for example, key surveillance measures in the European Union, like the Schengen Information System, the Boehm framework, PNA system, and so on and so forth. Okay, my thesis is that actually privacy by design cannot work for surveillance, or put it in another way, so that we need to rework it if we want to make it usable for surveillance too. And why? There are too many reasons for that. The first one is that there is a clash between privacy and surveillance, and this is a clash that we cannot eliminate. And one of the core principles of privacy by design is the win-win postulate, which says that we can improve security and or effectiveness and privacy. And I think this cannot hold for surveillance, and I will come back to that later on. And the second reason why I think that we need to rework the privacy by design framework when applied to surveillance is that we have to look beyond privacy only and look for other effects of surveillance, like the social and political effects of it. And I've tried to put this consideration together in an alternative framework, which I called minimum harm by design or not. Okay, but before talking about the minimum harm framework, I think there are 3 questions that must be addressed very quickly. The first one is, what is surveillance? I put it here 2 definitions. One is by David Lyon, whom somebody of you have heard earlier on today, and the second one by Haggerty, who Timothy also mentioned. Okay, the first definition, surveillance is the focused, systematic and routine attention to personal details for purposes of influence, management, protection or direction. The second one defines surveillance as the collection and analysis of information about populations in order to govern their activities. I think, so they are not seen really the same. I think the first one can be applied to business and to the private sector and to the public one. Equally, the second one maybe has a stronger accent on public, like on surveillance by the state. In any case, the sense of surveillance, which is common to these two definitions, is that surveillance is about gaining knowledge over individuals, and this is the reason why I think there is this clash between surveillance and privacy, because of course if the very point of surveillance is to get information and knowledge about you, then your privacy will be violated in some way or another. And of course there are, so this doesn't mean that technologies that are highly privacy intrusive are also high effective. So there is no direct connection today between them. So you can have an effective surveillance tool which is not so privacy intrusive, but anyway, a little bit of privacy violation will be there and cannot be eliminated. The second issue is what is a surveillance technology. I'm not talking about that too long, but in the paper I proposed a taxonomy, and the main point about that is that you can define or you can answer the question about technology, whether it is a surveillance technology or not, only in context and looking at the specific functionality of this technology in the way it is used. Okay, and the third question is, what are the further effects of surveillance? Because so I suggested before that we have to look not only to privacy intrusions, but also to the other effects of surveillance. So I think we have two further families of effects of surveillance, of negative effects of surveillance. The first one can be called the political effects. I'm referring here to the chilling effect. The picture is a picture of a panopticon, and I think this is also known to most of you, so I'm not gonna talk a lot about the panopticon, but the very point of that is that you have a surveillance system that is visible, so you know there is this surveillance in place, but it is not verifiable, which means that you never know if at a given moment you are really surveyed or not. This kind of surveillance is continuous and it is also indiscriminated. So everybody being in the panopticon can be potentially surveyed. And the effect is that in the end you behave according to the norms, even if nobody is really surveying you in this moment, and this might have of course negative effects on democratic participation, on the enjoyment of fundamental rights like freedom of association, demonstration, and so on and so forth. And then the third family of negative effects of surveillance might be called, in my opinion, the social effects of surveillance. They refer to social sorting and discrimination, which is the idea that yes, that you can pick up individuals or group of persons and organize them in different groups and treat them differently, and of course depending on the reason why you are treating them differently and the consequence for them, this might lead to discrimination. For example, if you deny to some group of people access to some basic services like health, education, and so on and so forth. Okay. So that said, what is the idea behind the minimum harm approach? The idea is, so there are too many points. The first one is a theoretical one. I have already said a couple of words about that. It's like we can formulate it like beyond the win-win postulate or back to the trade-off in a more provocative way. I know that it is a point that might raise some objections and criticism and so on, because there have been a lot of efforts in the privacy community to go beyond the idea that there is a trade-off between security and privacy, because this is not a good starting point, say, for privacy, because usually you see privacy as an individual right and security as a collective good, and then of course the position of privacy is very weak. It's very weak if you start from this position. What I want to say is not that we have to go back to such a sort of trade-off, but that maybe it might be a more healthier position to start saying, okay, if we are introducing surveillance, we might have problems with privacy, and we have to check them with privacy and with the other values here, and we have to check them instead of starting and say, okay, we have no problems at all, and surveillance can be achieved in a way that is not problematic for individuals, the society, and democracy, and so on and so forth. And then the second idea behind the minimum harm approach is that so we should try to consider or to directly look for the other two families of negative effects of surveillance beyond privacy, and not consider them as, I think it is the case now, as secondary consequences of privacy violations, but to treat them as standalone criteria or values or effects. What I've tried to do in the paper is also to identify criteria for addressing these effects directly. For example, for the chilling effect, to ask if the surveillance system is visible but non-verifiable, if the surveillance system is continuous and indiscriminate, and for discrimination, if there are large amounts of data available, and if those data are also sensitive data. And then I think building upon these criteria, you can imagine actions to mitigate those effects. Okay, that's all for me. I'm really looking forward for your feedback, for your questions and criticism.
Thanks, Elisa. Thanks a lot. Yeah. I think that
You were laughing in the list.
This is here, founder of ISB in Germany, Karlsruhe.
Yeah.
I'd like to refer you to a paper we published in 2012, where we discussed a similar question, and we came to the conclusion that we do not have to abolish the win-win situation principle, but to change the perspective. So we compare new surveillance systems, new developed surveillance systems, with a priori situation of existing surveillance systems. And in this increasing the value for the people surveyed and the value for the people which would like to benefit from civilians.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, it's like your approach, reducing harm, but we'd like to keep the principles of privacy by design as brought up in the community.
Mm-hmm. Is that the paper written by Beer too? Christian Beer? Yeah, okay. I know it very well. Yeah, so this is another perspective. You can say comparatively to previous systems, you have a win-win situation because you can improve both. And I really liked also the analysis you made of the win-win or zero-sum postulate and so on. Yes, nevertheless, I think on the other side, I think it is misleading. Nevertheless, if you are talking about surveillance, not for all applications of privacy by design, to talk about improving privacy, because in the end, you have a privacy loss. But but I really liked your paper. So
any other question? Because I have one. If no one. Okay, so I'm really interested in whether you can, because you need maybe a legal base for this. You
legal?
say, you say because harm or chilling effect is an own value, and you need to consider it as not a secondary effect, but as a primary idea. And maybe, but where do you consider that in legal terms? I mean, it's nice to. Yeah, it's nice to have this idea. It's a primary effect, but can you link that to a kind of legal basis?
So I think this is another problem, because, for example, if you read the sentence of the European Court of Justice, or more than the sentence, the opinion of the Advocate General before, then you read. So they say exactly. So they were asked to check if the data retention directive was intruding privacy, clashing with privacy protections, but also with other articles of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which were freedom of speech, I think. Okay, so the chilling effect. Yeah. And they said, so there is no need to check this. Yeah. I think this is a problem. So we have no legal solution now for that, even if in the USA jurisprudence the chilling effect is quite known and used as a category, but we have no legal solution for that now. But I think this is a problem, and so I'm not hoping I'm gonna change it through that, but it is not.
Okay, I was just interested in that question, because sure you need some kind of basis. Okay, if you don't have any question, because I think we run out of time, so I don't want to keep you away from your coffee, actually, or whatever, beer, I think. I think a round of applause for all the speakers before you go, and thanks for coming. So, thanks.